Emperor Vexthal stood before the massive viewport of his flagship, watching the blue-green world of Kepler 442b burn. The orbital bombardment had been precise, surgical even, every human settlement reduced to ash in exactly 14 minutes. The screams had stopped hours ago. His forearms moved across the holographic display, reviewing casualty reports with the same detachment he might show when selecting breakfast. The numbers glowed in pale amber, 5,731 confirmed juvenile casualties, ages ranging from newborn to 17 standard years. The Terran Defense Coalition had tried to evacuate the children first, of course. Humans always did that. Such a predictable weakness. Your Magnificence, his aide, Sub-Commander Krillex, approached with careful steps. The insectoid being's mandibles clicked nervously. The human survivors are requesting permission to retrieve their dead for burial. Vexthal's primary eyes never left the burning planet below. His species, the Zephyrians, had conquered 47 star systems in the past century. They were methodical, efficient, and utterly without mercy when required. The galaxy had learned to fear the sight of their distinctive crescent-shaped warships. Denied, he said simply. Let them burn with their world. The lesson must be complete. This had been the 15th human colony to fall under his command. The Terran Defense Coalition had made the mistake of refusing his empire's generous offer of vassalage. They chose to fight instead of submit. Now they would face the consequences of that choice, one world at a time. The hologram flickered, showing the tactical situation across the sector. Red markers indicated conquered human worlds. Blue showed those still under coalition control. There were so many blue markers left. This war would continue for years, perhaps decades. Vexthal found the prospect almost boring. Sir, Krillex ventured again. There's been an unusual development. A single human vessel approached our perimeter 20 minutes ago. A civilian transport, completely unarmed. They're requesting permission to speak with you directly. Destroy it, Vexthal ordered without hesitation. That's the unusual part, Magnificence. They're not fleeing. The ship transmitted a message specifically for you. The human claims to know something about the Kepler resistance that you need to hear. They say they have information about a weapon the Coalition is developing. This gave Vexthal pause. Intelligence suggested the humans were working on something in their core worlds, though his spies had been unable to determine what. Perhaps this could save him time in the long run. Scan the vessel thoroughly. If it's clean, bring the human aboard. Full security protocols. Minutes later, Vexthal stood in his personal conference chamber, a sterile room designed to intimidate. The walls displayed holographic images of his greatest victories. The crystalline cities of Altair Prime melting under plasma fire, the proud avian fleets of the Rigel system burning in the void. Each image carefully chosen to demonstrate the futility of resistance. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. 2 guards escorted a human female into the chamber. She was small by human standards, perhaps in her 4th decade of life, brown hair streaked with premature gray, wearing simple civilian clothes that had seen better days. What struck Vexthal immediately was her eyes. Most beings who met him showed fear, anger, or desperate hope. This human showed none of those things. Her gaze was steady, almost analytical. I am Emperor Vexthal of the Zephyrian Empire. You requested this audience. Speak quickly before I decide your information is worthless and have you executed. The human took a single step forward. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly in the chamber's acoustics. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I was the chief pediatric surgeon on Kepler 442b. I operated on children for 15 years on that world. Vexthal's secondary eyes focused on her while his primaries continued to monitor the tactical displays. Your profession is irrelevant. What weapon does the Coalition possess? There is no weapon, Dr. Chen said simply. I lied about that to get aboard your ship. The guards immediately raised their energy rifles, but Vexthal held up one hand to stop them. His species had evolved as apex predators on a world where deception often meant death. He could sense when prey was hiding something, and this human was not lying now. That made her either very brave or completely insane. Then why are you here? He asked, genuine curiosity creeping into his voice. I came to look at you, she said. I wanted to see the face of someone who could order the death of children and feel nothing. I've spent my life saving young lives. You've spent yours ending them. I needed to understand what kind of creature you are. Vexthal's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his kind. And what conclusion have you reached, Dr. Chen? She studied his face for a long moment. taking in his coal black eyes, the chitinous plates that covered his skull, the way his 4 arms moved independently of each other. When she finally spoke, it was with the tone of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "You're afraid," she said. The words hit Vexthul like a physical blow. In 40 years of conquest, no one had ever accused him of fear. Rage, yes. Cruelty, certainly, but fear. The very suggestion was absurd. "I fear nothing," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You fear humans," Dr. Chen continued, ignoring the weapons pointed at her. "You fear what we represent. That's why you target our children specifically. You're trying to break something in us that your species doesn't possess. And what might that be?" Dr. Chen's next word would echo in Vexthul's mind for the rest of his long life, though he didn't know it yet. Hope. The word hung in the air between them like a living thing. Hope. Vexthul had heard the human language translated thousands of times, but something about the way Dr. Chen spoke that single word made his secondary brain centers fire in patterns he didn't recognize. "Hope is a delusion," he said finally. "A chemical reaction that prevents intelligent beings from accepting reality. My empire has brought order to dozens of species by teaching them to abandon such foolishness." Dr. Chen shook her head slowly. "You don't understand it at all, do you? That's why you're losing this war." The guards tensed, expecting their emperor to order the humans' immediate execution for such an outrageous claim. Instead, Vexthul found himself leaning forward slightly. "Explain." "Every world you've conquered had already given up before you arrived. The Altarians, the Rigelians, the others. They all calculated the odds, saw they couldn't win, and surrendered their hope before the first shot was fired. That's why conquering them was easy." She gestured toward the viewport where Kepler 442b continued to smolder. "But humans don't work that way. Every child you killed today just convinced 1,000 more humans that they have nothing left to lose. You think you're teaching us fear, but you're actually teaching us something far more dangerous, which is that monsters like you exist, and that someone needs to stop them." Vexthul's primary eyes narrowed. "You speak of your species as if it were special. Every race believes itself unique until the moment they kneel before superior force." "We are different," Dr. Chen said with quiet conviction. "Do you know what I was doing when your ships appeared in orbit? I was performing emergency surgery on a 7-year-old girl named Maria Santos. She'd been injured in a playground accident. Severe internal bleeding, less than 10% chance of survival." She paused, studying his face. "When the air raid siren started, my entire surgical team could have run for the evacuation shuttles. Instead, we stayed. We finished the operation while your bombs fell around us. Maria lived. She survived until your orbital strike hit the hospital. A waste of time and resources," Vexthul observed. "The logical choice would have been to evacuate." "Logic," Dr. Chen repeated, and for the first time he heard something like pity in her voice. "Your species sees the universe as a mathematical equation to be solved. Resources to be allocated efficiently. Threats to be eliminated with minimum waste. But you can't quantify hope. You can't calculate the exact moment when a species decides it would rather die fighting than live kneeling." She stepped closer, and Vexthul noticed his guards shifting nervously, not because she posed a physical threat, but because something about her calm certainty was deeply unsettling. It reminded him of religious fanatics his empire had encountered. Except this human showed no signs of delusion or madness. "Tell me about your children." "Emperor," she said suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "My species reproduces through hive queens. I have no offspring, but you were a child once. Do you remember what that was like?" Vexthul's mind flashed back unwillingly to his early years in the imperial nurseries. Zephyrian larvae were raised in strict hierarchies, competing for resources and rank from the moment they could walk. Weakness was eliminated quickly and efficiently. The strong survived to serve the empire. It was a perfect system. Zephyrian children learned discipline and purpose, he said. Human children learned chaos and false dreams. Human children learn to hope, Dr. Chen corrected. They learn that tomorrow can be better than today. That's why we keep fighting wars we can't win. That's why we rebuild cities that get destroyed. That's why we have children even when the galaxy is burning around us. She moved to stand directly in front of him now, close enough that he could smell the smoke and ash clinging to her clothes, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, and something else, a kind of fierce determination that made his predatory instincts whisper warnings. You killed 5,931 children today, she said quietly. Each one of them believed right until the end that someone was coming to save them, that their parents would find them, that the good guys would win because good guys always win in the stories we tell our young. Childish fantasies, Vexthul said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Maybe. But those children died believing in something larger than themselves. They died with hope intact. Can you say the same about your soldiers? About yourself? For reasons he couldn't explain, Vexthul found himself thinking about his fleet commanders, his generals, his vast military machine. They served efficiently without question because they feared punishment and sought reward. But hope? The concept was alien to his entire species. Hope is what makes humans dangerous, Dr. Chen continued. Not our technology, not our tactics, not our numbers. Hope makes us willing to sacrifice everything for a future we might never see. It makes us fight impossible battles and win them through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. She smiled then, and it was perhaps the most terrifying expression Vexthul had ever seen. Not because it showed hatred or anger, but because it showed absolute certainty. You can burn 1,000 worlds, Emperor. You can kill 1,000,000 children, but you can't kill hope itself. And as long as even one human survives, we'll keep fighting. We'll keep believing. We'll keep hoping that tomorrow, someone like you gets exactly what they deserve. The conference chamber fell silent except for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Vexthul stared at this small, unremarkable human female who had somehow made him feel something he hadn't experienced since his larval days in the nurseries. Uncertainty. Finally, he spoke. Take her to detention level 7. Full isolation. I want complete medical and psychological scans. As the guards moved to escort Dr. Chen away, she paused at the doorway. Emperor? That word I taught you today? You're going to hear it again. Soon. The doors sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving Vexthul alone with his thoughts and the dying light of Kepler 442b. 3 days passed before Vexthul could bring himself to review Dr. Chen's medical scans. The reports sat on his personal terminal like an accusation, their amber glow casting shadows across his private quarters. When he finally accessed them, the results were exactly what he'd expected. Completely normal human physiology, no signs of mental illness or chemical enhancement. She was exactly what she claimed to be. A doctor who had spent her life saving children, confronting the destroyer of worlds with nothing but words. The psychological profile was more disturbing. The ship's AI had analyzed her speech patterns, micro-expressions, and stress responses during their conversation. According to the data, Dr. Sarah Chen had been telling the complete truth. Every word of it. That should have been impossible. Prey species always lied when facing death, seeking any advantage that might preserve their lives. Fear drove deception as surely as gravity pulled objects toward planetary surfaces. But this human had walked onto his ship knowing she would likely die, and she had spoken nothing but truth. Vexthul found himself returning to the detention level that evening, something he'd never done before in 40 years of conquest. The guard captain looked surprised to see him but quickly activated the cell's viewing portal. Dr. Chen sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly and evenly. She appeared to be meditating, another peculiarly human practice his xenological studies had never fully explained. When the portal activated, she opened her eyes and looked directly at him, unsurprised by his presence. Having trouble sleeping, Emperor? The fact that she could read him so easily was deeply unsettling. I came to continue our previous conversation. About hope? About your species' apparent inability to accept reality. He activated the cell's communication system, allowing them to speak normally. You claim humans are different from other races, but the evidence suggests otherwise. We've destroyed 15 of your colonies. Your fleets retreat before ours. Your worlds burn just as easily as any other. Dr. Chen stood up, stretching muscles stiff from sitting on the metal floor. You're measuring the wrong things. Victory isn't about ships destroyed or worlds conquered. It's about whether the spirit of resistance survives. An abstract concept with no tactical value. Is it? She moved to stand near the energy barrier that confined her. Tell me, Emperor, how many of your previous conquests required ongoing occupation forces? The question caught him off guard with its precision. All subjugated territories require garrison fleets to maintain order. Exactly. You haven't actually conquered anything. You've just created 47 prison planets that require constant supervision. The moment your fleets leave, those worlds will rebel again. Because you never understood what you were really fighting. Vexthal's mandibles clicked irritably. Rebellion without hope of success is mere terrorism. Eventually, the cost becomes too high to sustain. You still don't get it. Dr. Chen shook her head sadly. Let me tell you about Earth's history. We've had thousands of wars, Emperor, fought for territory, resources, ideology, religion, but the wars that lasted longest, the ones that defined us as a species, were always the ones where one side refused to surrender their hope. She began pacing the small cell, her voice taking on the rhythm of a teacher explaining a complex concept to a slow student. 2,000 years ago, a tiny human territory called Judea fought the Roman Empire. Rome had the largest, most disciplined military in the known world. Judea had farmers with improvised weapons. Logic said the fight was hopeless. Yet they continued fighting, Vexathal said, beginning to see the pattern. For 70 years, they lost every major battle, but they kept fighting because they believed their cause was just. Eventually, it contributed to the Roman Empire's collapse, not because the Judeans won militarily, but because hope is contagious. Other oppressed peoples saw that resistance was possible. The comparison to his current situation was uncomfortably clear. You're suggesting that human resistance will spread to other species. I'm not suggesting it, Emperor. I'm telling you it's already happening. Do you think the Altarians don't know about Kepler 442b by now? Do you think they haven't noticed that humans keep fighting even when you murder our children? Dr. Chen stopped pacing and looked directly at him through the energy barrier. You've made a strategic error that will destroy your empire. You've given the galaxy something it never had before, proof that the mighty Zephyrian Empire can be resisted. We haven't been defeated, Vexthal protested. But even as he said it, he felt doubt creeping into his thoughts like poison. No, you haven't, but you also haven't won. And in a war of annihilation, anything short of complete victory is eventual defeat. Every day this conflict continues, more species learn that your fleets aren't invincible. Your reputation for inevitable conquest dies a little more. She gestured toward the viewport where stars wheeled slowly past. Right now, there are probably secret meetings happening on dozens of worlds. Former enemies putting aside their differences to discuss something they never dared consider before. What if we all fought the Zephyrians together? The implications hit Vexthal like a meteor impact. His empire's strength had always come from fighting isolated opponents one at a time, using superior technology and tactics to achieve quick victories. But if multiple species coordinated their resistance, even if such an alliance formed, he said carefully, they would still lack our technological advantages. Technology can be shared, tactics can be learned, but the most important weapon in any war is the willingness to use it. Dr. Chen's eyes held that same disturbing certainty he'd noticed during their first meeting. Humans are teaching the galaxy something your species apparently never learned, that some things are worth dying for. Such as the right to exist without bowing to monsters, the right to raise children who don't live in terror, the right to hope for a better future. She paused, studying his face. Tell me, Emperor, what would your people fight to the death to protect? Vexthal considered the question seriously. His species valued efficiency, order, strength. They served the Empire because it provided security and resources. But would they die for abstract principles? Would they continue fighting when victory became impossible? The honest answer disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Our conversation is concluded, he said abruptly, moving to deactivate the communication system. One more thing, Dr. Chen called out, stopping him. That 7-year-old girl I mentioned? Maria Santos. She had an older brother named Carlos. He escaped on one of the last evacuation ships. Vexthal turned back to spite himself. This information is irrelevant. Carlos Santos is 15 years old now. By the time he reaches adulthood, he'll know exactly who killed his little sister. He'll know your name, your face, your ship's designation, and someday, Emperor, he's going to come looking for you. She smiled, that terrible, certain smile again. Children grow up, and when they do, they remember who destroyed their worlds. They remember who they need to find. Hope isn't just about believing in a better future, Emperor. Sometimes it's about believing in justice. As Vexthal walked away from the detention level, Dr. Chen's words echoed in his mind. For the first time in his life, the vast emptiness of space outside his flagship felt less like an ocean of conquest, and more like a hunting ground where he might be the prey. 6 months later, Vexthal stood in his war room studying holographic displays that told a story he didn't want to believe. Red markers showed Zephyrian fleet positions across 17 sectors. Blue markers indicated human forces, but now there were new colors on the map. Green for Altarian ships, yellow for Rigelian squadrons, purple for half a dozen smaller species that had never cooperated before. The alliance Dr. Chen had predicted was real. Intelligence reports confirm it. Magnificence, Sub-Commander Krillek said, his mandibles clicking nervously. The humans have shared their defensive technologies with at least 12 other species. Our tactical advantages are diminishing rapidly. Vexthul's primary eyes focused on a cluster of yellow markers near the Vega system. The proud avian Rigelians, who had surrendered without firing a shot 3 years ago, were now flying combat missions alongside human pilots. Their ancient warrior culture, dormant under Zephyrian occupation, had awakened at the sight of human children dying for their beliefs. Casualties? He asked, rising steadily. The Kepler campaign cost us 47 ships and 11,000 troops. Previous conquests required minimal losses. The numbers told the story plainly enough. Wars of annihilation were supposed to be swift, overwhelming applications of force that broke enemy resistance before it could organize. This had become something else entirely. A grinding conflict of attrition that his empire was not designed to fight. Sir, Communications Officer Veltar called from her station. We're receiving another broadcast from the Human Coalition. Same channel as always. Vexthul knew what was coming. Every day for the past 2 months, human stations had broadcast the same message across every frequency they could reach. He'd ordered his communication staff to block the transmissions, but somehow they kept getting through. Play it, he said. The main display shimmered, showing a human male in his early 20s. Dark hair, determined eyes, wearing the blue uniform of the Terran Defense Coalition. Behind him stood representatives from a dozen species, all facing the camera with expressions of grim resolve. I am Carlos Santos, speaking for the Free Worlds Alliance, the young human began. 6 months ago, Emperor Vexthul of the Zephyrian Empire ordered the destruction of Kepler 442b. Among the 5,531 children murdered in that attack was my 7-year-old sister, Maria. Vexthul felt something cold settle in his chest cavity. Dr. Chen had been right about this too. We broadcast this message not to threaten or intimidate, Carlos continued, but to make a promise. Every child killed, every family destroyed, every world burned, they will be remembered, and they will be avenged. The camera pulled back to show the full assembly. Altarian crystals hummed in harmony with Rigelian war songs, while human voices joined in something that transcended language barriers. It was hope made audible, defiance given voice. This is psychological warfare, Krillek observed. They're attempting to demoralize our forces. Is it working? Vexthul asked. His aide's mandibles clicked uncertainly. Desertion rates have increased by 12% over the past month. Several ship commanders have requested transfers to sectors further from human space. Before Vexthul could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the flagship. Tactical displays flashed urgent warnings as dozens of new contacts appeared at the edge of sensor range. Enemy fleet detected, the navigation officer announced. Mixed composition, human, Altarian, and Rigelian vessels. Estimated strength, 400 ships. Vexthul studied the tactical situation with a growing sense of unease. The enemy formation was smaller than his fleet, but their approach showed sophisticated coordination between species that had been enemies themselves only years ago. More disturbing was their positioning. They weren't trying to escape or defend. They were advancing directly toward his forces. Battle stations, he ordered. All ships prepare for engagement. The next few hours would haunt Vexthul for the rest of his life. The Allied fleet fought with a ferocity that defied tactical analysis. Human ships used kamikaze runs to break Zephyrian formations, while Altarian vessels provided covering fire. Rigelian fighters danced through the chaos like deadly birds, their pilots singing death songs as they died. But it was the coordination that truly disturbed him. Ships from 3 different species with different technologies and combat doctrines fought as if they shared a single mind. They covered each other's weaknesses, maximized each other's strengths, and died together when retreat would have been more logical. Sir, Veltar called out over the sound of hull breaches and emergency klaxons. The enemy flagship is broadcasting on all frequencies. Show me. Carlos Santos appeared on screen again, but now he wore combat armor and stood on what was clearly a ship's bridge. Behind him, Vexthul could see human and alien crew members working side by side, their faces grim but determined. Emperor Vexthul, Carlos said, looking directly into the camera. You're listening, aren't you? Good. I want you to understand something important. The young human gestured toward the tactical displays showing the ongoing battle. Everyone fighting today volunteered for this mission. We told them the odds. We told them most wouldn't survive. Do you know what they said? He paused, and Vexthul found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment. They said it was about time someone showed the galaxy that monsters can bleed. The transmission cut to external views of the battle. Vexthul watched in horrified fascination as a human destroyer, its hull breached and atmosphere venting, turned directly toward a Zephyrian battlecruiser. The smaller ship's engines flared to maximum power as it accelerated into a collision course. Sir, the weapons officer shouted, the human ship is going to ram the dominant Fang. Vexthul could only watch as the human destroyer struck his battlecruiser amidships. The explosion lit up the tactical display like a new star, taking both ships and their crews into oblivion. But even as his fleet achieved technical victory, destroying the Allied force with acceptable losses, Vexthul knew something fundamental had changed. His enemies were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to prove a point. That evening, as damage reports flooded in and casualty lists grew longer, Dr. Chen's words echoed in his mind. Hope makes us willing to sacrifice everything for a future we might never see. For the first time in his career, Emperor Vexthul began to wonder if he was fighting a war he could not win. Not because his enemies were stronger, but because they believed in something he couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't destroy. In her detention cell, Dr. Sarah Chen sat quietly, listening to the distant sounds of repair crews working through the night. She had felt the ship shake during the battle, had heard the alarms and emergency announcements. She knew what was happening across the galaxy, knew that the word she had spoken was spreading like wildfire among species that had forgotten what resistance meant. Tomorrow, there would be more battles. More ships would burn, more lives would be lost. But tonight, hope lived in the darkness between the stars, and that was enough. The breaking point came 18 months after Dr. Chen first spoke the word that would reshape the galaxy. Vexthul received the report while reviewing intelligence assessments in his private study, surrounded by holographic star charts that now showed more contested systems than secure ones. The Dominar Council is convening an emergency session, Krillix announced, his voice carrying barely controlled panic. They're demanding your immediate return to the homeworld. Vexthul's four hands stopped moving across the tactical displays. The Dominar Council represented the oldest and most powerful families in the Zephyrian Empire. They had given him unprecedented authority to expand imperial territory, trusting in his proven record of swift, efficient conquests. Now, for the first time in 40 years, they were questioning his methods. What prompted this summons? The Proxima incident, sir. The complete loss of the 7th Fleet, the recordings. Vexthul didn't need to hear the rest. 3 days ago, his largest battle group had encountered a coalition fleet near Proxima Centauri. What should have been a routine engagement had turned into a massacre, not of human ships, but of his own forces. The enemy had used a new tactic, something his strategists called martyrdom warfare. Human ships loaded with antimatter charges had broken through his formations while Allied vessels provided covering fire. In less than 2 hours, the 7th Fleet had ceased to exist, taking with it some of his most experienced commanders. But the recordings were what truly disturbed the Dominar Council. In the final moments of the battle, as Zephyrian ships died around them, the human pilots had been singing, not war chants or victory songs, but lullabies, the kind mothers sang to comfort frightened children. They died singing lullabies, Vexthul murmured, more to himself than to his aide. Sir, nothing. Prepare my personal transport. We returned to Zephyr Prime immediately. The journey home took 8 days through hyperspace, 8 days for Vexthul to contemplate how completely his understanding of warfare had been shattered. He found himself returning repeatedly to his conversations with Dr. Chen, trying to understand how a species could turn suicidal attacks into expressions of hope. Zephyr Prime loomed before his transport like a metallic jewel, its surface covered by the crystalline spires that housed the Empire's ruling elite. The sight had always filled him with pride before. Now it seemed fragile, vulnerable in ways he'd never considered. The Dominar Council chambers occupied the highest spire of the Imperial complex, A vast hall designed to intimidate visitors with its displays of conquered artifacts and holographic records of victory. Vexthul had stood in this room many times to receive commendations and new territories to pacify. Today the atmosphere felt decidedly different. 12 Zephyrians sat in judgment, representing bloodlines that stretched back to the Empire's founding. Their combined age totaled nearly 3,000 years, and their collective gaze made even Vexthul feel like a larva again. Emperor Vexthul, Dominar Prime Zektar began, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power. Your campaign against the human territories has lasted longer than any previous conquest. Explain this failure. Vexthul's training in Imperial protocol warred with his growing understanding of what they were really fighting. The humans are different from previous opponents, Dominar Prime. Their resistance patterns don't follow established models. Elaborate. He activated the chamber's holographic display, showing the progression of the war over the past 2 years. Red markers indicated Zephyrian victories, blue showed human-held territory, and green represented worlds that had joined the growing alliance. Traditional conquest doctrine assumes that sufficient force applied properly will break enemy morale, he began. We calculate casualty thresholds, identify strategic targets, eliminate command structures. These methods have proven effective across 47 previous campaigns. The display zoomed in on recent battle sites, showing tactical analyses that made no logical sense. Human forces consistently chose to fight battles they couldn't win, accepted losses that should have broken their command structure, and somehow maintained operational effectiveness despite catastrophic casualties. But humans operate on different principles, Vexthul continued. They don't calculate victory in terms of preserved resources or territorial control. They measure success by their ability to continue resisting. Dominar Velkris, ancient even by Zephyrian standards, leaned forward with interest. You speak as if resistance itself has become their objective. I believe it has, Dominar. They've turned the act of fighting into a form of victory. Each battle they survive, each ship they destroy, each day they continue to exist. All of these become proof that their cause is just. Absurd, Dominar Thexel declared. No species can sustain such illogical behavior indefinitely. Resources are finite. Population is finite. Eventually, they must accept reality. Vexthul thought of Dr. Chen in her detention cell, speaking with calm certainty about concepts his species couldn't grasp. With respect, Dominar, I'm not certain they share our definition of reality. He changed the display to show current intelligence estimates. The numbers told a story that violated everything the Empire understood about warfare and conquest. Human birth rates have increased by 30% since the conflict began. Their industrial output has tripled. Species that had never cooperated are now sharing military technologies and coordinating fleet movements across multiple sectors. The chamber fell silent as the Dominars absorbed these implications. Finally, Dominar Prime Zektar spoke. Are you suggesting, Emperor, that our attacks have somehow strengthened our enemies? I'm reporting observable facts, Dominar Prime. Every world we destroy convinces 10 others to join the Alliance. Every child we kill creates a dozen new soldiers dedicated to our destruction. We are teaching the galaxy to hate us. Dominar Velkris activated her own displays, showing economic projections and resource allocation charts. The cost of this campaign has exceeded budgetary projections by 400%. Our garrison fleets are stretched across too many systems. Other potential enemies are beginning to view us as vulnerable. You're saying we should withdraw, Vexthul said, though the words felt strange in his mouth. We're saying you should win, Dominar Prime Zektar corrected. Quickly and decisively, end this conflict before it spreads further. And if that's not possible? The Dominar Prime's eyes hardened. Then we will find someone who can achieve what you cannot. That evening, Vexthul stood on the observation deck of his personal quarters, watching Zephyr Prime's twin moons rise over the Imperial city. For the first time in his life, he felt something approaching what humans might call despair. His communicator chimed with an urgent message from his flagship. The transmission contained a single word, broadcast simultaneously across every frequency in human space. Remember. It had been spoken by a child's voice, no more than 6 or 7 years old. In the background, other young voices could be heard joining in, creating a chorus that somehow managed to sound like both a lament and a promise. As Vexthul listened to children singing across the darkness between stars, he finally understood what Dr. Chen had been trying to tell him. Hope wasn't just about believing in victory. It was about ensuring that memory survived defeat, that sacrifice had meaning, that someone would continue the fight even when the original warriors fell. He was no longer battling a collection of territories and populations. He was fighting an idea that grew stronger every time he tried to destroy it. And ideas, he was beginning to realize, were the most dangerous enemies of all. The revelation came not through battle or intelligence reports, but through a single intercepted transmission that changed everything Vexthul thought he knew about the war. He was in his flagship's strategic center when Communications Officer Veltar approached with an expression of confusion rather than urgency. "Sir, we've detected an unusual broadcast from human space. It's different from their normal propaganda transmissions." "Show me." The main display activated, revealing a scene that struck Vexthul like a physical blow. The transmission originated from New Geneva Station, a human medical facility that had somehow remained neutral throughout the conflict. The camera showed a vast hospital ward filled with children, not human children, but young Zephyrians. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen speaking from New Geneva Medical Station," came a familiar voice. The human surgeon who had spent months in his detention cells now stood in a sterile medical bay, her hands covered in surgical gloves as she moved between treatment stations. Vexthul's secondary brain centers fired in patterns he didn't recognize. Dr. Chen had been executed 6 months ago. He had personally authorized her termination after she refused to provide intelligence about human military capabilities. Yet here she was, apparently alive and treating injured members of his own species. "We're broadcasting this message to all Zephyrian command frequencies," Dr. Chen continued, "because we believe you have a right to know what's happening to your wounded." The camera followed her to a treatment bed where a young Zephyrian, barely past larval stage, lay unconscious with severe burns across his chitinous plates. Dr. Chen's hands moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting medical equipment and monitoring vital signs. "This is Tactical Officer Zexamir of the Light of Victory," she explained while working. His ship was destroyed during the Vega engagement 3 weeks ago. He was found floating in an escape pod by one of our rescue ships. Vexthul knew the battle she referenced. The Light of Victory had been part of a scouting force that encountered an unexpectedly large human fleet. There had been no survivors reported. According to Zephyrian military doctrine, Dr. Chen continued, wounded soldiers who cannot return to active duty are considered resource drains. They're typically disposed of to maintain fleet efficiency. She paused in her work to look directly into the camera. Humans see things differently. The transmission cut to show dozens of treatment bays, each containing injured Zephyrians, receiving medical care from human doctors and nurses. Some of the patients were conscious, their eyes wide with something that looked like shock or disbelief. "We've been rescuing your wounded for over a year now," Dr. Chen explained. "Every battle, every engagement, we send out search and rescue operations to collect survivors from both sides. Your people seem surprised by this." One of the conscious patients, a mid-level officer whose name tag read Kextal, spoke to the camera in halting human standard. They saved me." "Why would enemies save me?" Dr. Chen moved to stand beside his bed. "Because you're injured and in need of medical care. Nothing else matters in a hospital." Vexthul watched in growing amazement as the transmission continued. Human medical staff worked alongside volunteers from a dozen allied species, treating Zephyrian wounded with the same care they would show their own people. More disturbing was the obvious comfort level of the patients. They weren't behaving like prisoners or hostages, but like individuals receiving genuine medical attention. "The interesting thing," Dr. Chen continued, "is what happens when we explain human culture to your people. They ask a lot of questions about families, about children, about why we fight for concepts like freedom and hope." The camera focused on a group of recovering Zephyrians who appeared to be engaged in discussion with human staff. Their body language showed engagement rather than hostility, curiosity rather than fear. "Officer Zexamir here asked me an interesting question yesterday," Dr. Chen said, returning to the first patient's bedside. He wanted to know why humans sing lullabies to dying enemies. She activated a recording device beside the bed. Vexthul heard his own people's voices. singing the soft harmonies Zephyrian parents used to comfort their larvae during storms. But mixed with those familiar sounds were human voices, creating something entirely new, a hybrid lullaby that somehow managed to be both alien and universal. We started this practice after the Battle of Wolf 359, Dr. Chen explained. A human nurse realized that dying Zephyrian soldiers were afraid, not of death but of dying alone, so she began sitting with them, learning their comfort songs, helping them feel less isolated in their final moments. The implications hit Vexthol like a nova blast. His enemies weren't just treating captured Zephyrians. They were showing them compassion, understanding, basic dignity that his own empire denied to wounded soldiers. Here's what we've learned, Dr. Chen continued. Your people aren't monsters. They're soldiers following orders in a system that treats them as expendable resources. When exposed to different ideas, many of them begin questioning those orders. She gestured toward a section of the medical bay where a group of Zephyrians sat in what appeared to be a discussion circle with human facilitators. These individuals have volunteered to remain here rather than being repatriated. They want to learn more about human society, about concepts like individual rights and voluntary cooperation. Officer Kextal spoke again, his voice stronger now. They showed me recordings of my homeworld, my family. I have 3 larvae I've never met because of military deployment requirements. These humans ask, why don't Zephyrian soldiers get to know their own children? Vexthol's mandibles clicked involuntarily. The question struck at something fundamental about Zephyrian society that he'd never thought to examine. Military service meant lifelong separation from civilian population. It ensured loyalty to the empire over family bonds. It was efficient, logical, necessary for maintaining order. It was also, he suddenly realized, deeply cruel. We're not trying to recruit defectors, Dr. Chen said, addressing the camera directly. We're simply treating injured beings with dignity and respect. What they choose to do with that experience is up to them. The transmission cut to show New Geneva Station's docking bay, where a small diplomatic vessel bearing Zephyrian markings was departing. The camera followed it until it disappeared into hyperspace. Twice weekly, we send ships to neutral zones where repatriated soldiers can choose their own futures, Dr. Chen explained. Some return to Zephyrian space. Others request asylum with human worlds. A few decide to stay here and work in our medical facilities. She paused, studying Vexthol through the camera as if she could see him watching. Emperor, you once told me that hope was a delusion. But what we've discovered is that hope isn't about believing in impossible outcomes. It's about believing that change is possible, that enemies can become friends, that even the most brutal conflicts can end in understanding rather than annihilation. The transmission began to fade, but Dr. Chen's final words came through clearly. Your people are asking questions now, Emperor. Questions about why this war started, whether it has to continue, and what kind of galaxy they want their children to inherit. Hope is contagious, and it's spreading. As the signal ended, Vexthol stood in his strategic center surrounded by displays showing fleet positions, casualty reports, and tactical analyses. But all he could think about were Zephyrian soldiers learning human lullabies and asking why they'd never met their own children. For the first time in his life, he began to wonder if the empire he served was worth preserving. The end came not with a great battle or surrender ceremony, but with a quiet conversation in the same conference chamber where Dr. Sarah Chen had first spoken the word that would change the galaxy. Vexthol sat alone at the polished table, studying intelligence reports that painted a picture of total strategic collapse. 16 Zephyrian worlds had declared independence from the Empire in the past month. Fleet commanders were reporting mass desertions as soldiers learned about treatment options at human medical facilities. The Dominar Council had already selected his replacement, a younger, more aggressive commander who promised to restore order through increased brutality. The door opened with its familiar soft hiss. Dr. Chen entered, flanked by 2 human guards who positioned themselves respectfully near the entrance. She wore the same simple civilian clothes as during their first meeting, though her gray hair showed more silver now and new lines marked her face. You requested this meeting, she said, taking a seat across from him. That surprises me. Many things surprise me now, Vexthol replied. I've been reviewing casualty reports from New Geneva Station. According to my intelligence services, you should have been executed months ago. Dr. Chen smiled sadly. Your people rescued me, actually. during a prisoner exchange 3 months after our last conversation. Apparently, some of your wounded soldiers specifically requested my involvement in their treatment. Impossible. Zephyrian military doctrine doesn't permit prisoner exchanges. Your military doctrine is changing, Emperor. When soldiers start refusing orders that contradict their personal ethics, doctrine becomes flexible. Vexthal's primary eyes focused on her while his secondary eyes monitored the tactical display still active around the chamber. The war continued, but it had transformed into something unrecognizable. Human fleets now included significant numbers of Zephyrian defectors. Entire sectors had declared neutrality, rather than continue fighting. His empire was dissolving from within. "You've accomplished something unprecedented," he said. "The destruction of a galactic power through medical care and kindergarten songs. We didn't destroy anything. We just showed people there were alternatives to what they'd always known." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Emperor, have you ever spoken with a Zephyrian child?" The question caught him off guard. Children are raised in imperial nurseries. Direct contact with adults outside the training hierarchy is discouraged. That's what I thought. Would you like to meet one? Before he could respond, Dr. Chen activated a portable communication device. The holographic display showed a small Zephyrian, perhaps 5 years old in human terms, sitting in what appeared to be a schoolroom. Other children, both human and alien, played in the background. "This is Ziktar," Dr. Chen explained. "Her parents were killed during the Procyon engagement. She was found aboard a damaged civilian transport and brought to our children's facility on Kepler Station." The young Zephyrian looked directly at Vexthal through the display, showing no fear despite his reputation. "Are you the Emperor?" she asked in perfectly clear human standard. "I am," Vexthal replied, unsure why he was answering. "Sarah told me you're the one who makes the war decisions. Why do you want to hurt people?" The simplicity of the question hit him harder than any tactical analysis or strategic briefing. Vexthal found himself staring at this child, seeing something in her primary eyes that he didn't recognize at first. It took him several moments to realize what he was seeing: curiosity without fear, questions without hostility. "The Empire requires order," he said finally. "Sometimes force is necessary to maintain stability." "But why?" Ziktar persisted. "My friends here are from lots of different planets, and we don't need anyone to make us get along. We just do." Dr. Chen spoke softly to the child, then turned back to Vexthal. "Ziktar and her classmates represent something your empire never considered. What happens when different species grow up together as equals? They don't see racial hierarchies or territorial boundaries. They see friends." She deactivated the communication device, leaving the chamber in silence. "That little girl will be an adult in 15 years, Emperor. She'll remember this war, but she'll also remember growing up in a society where former enemies chose cooperation over conquest. Her generation won't make the same choices yours did." Vexthal studied the tactical displays showing the gradual collapse of his empire's authority. Each defection, each declaration of independence, each soldier who chose asylum over military service. They all traced back to individual moments when Zephyrians learned that alternatives to their rigid hierarchical society existed. "You're asking me to surrender," he said. "I'm asking you to choose," Dr. Chen corrected. "You can continue this war until your empire tears itself apart, or you can help build something better from what remains." "And what would that look like?" Dr. Chen activated the chamber's main display, showing a document that had been circulating through diplomatic channels for weeks. Vexthal had read it several times but never seriously considered its implications. "The Galactic Cooperation Accords," she said. "A framework for voluntary association between species, based on mutual benefit rather than dominance. Trade relationships instead of tribute systems. Shared technology development instead of military expansion. Individual rights protected regardless of species origin." The document represented everything his empire had been created to prevent: chaos, disorder, the collapse of stable hierarchies. Yet as Vexthal read through its provisions, he realized it described a galaxy where young Zephyrians could ask questions without fear, where wounded soldiers received medical care regardless of their allegiances, where children from different worlds grew up as friends rather than enemies. "The Dominar Council will never accept this," he said. "The Dominar Council is already fracturing. Half your territorial governors have declared independence. Your military commanders are negotiating separate peace agreements with local human forces. The empire you've spent your life serving is already gone, Emperor. The question is whether you want to help create what comes next. Vexthul stood and walked to the viewport where Kepler 442b had once burned. The planet was still there, but now it showed signs of reconstruction. New cities rising from the ashes, orbital facilities being rebuilt, ships coming and going in peaceful commerce. There's something I need to know, he said without turning around. Those 731 children I killed. Do you forgive me for that? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of professional experience and personal loss. Forgiveness isn't something I can give you, Emperor. That's between you and the families you destroyed. But I can tell you this, redemption is possible. Not through forgetting what you've done, but by ensuring it never happens again. She stood to leave, then paused at the chamber entrance. Carlos Santos, the young man who's been leading the resistance fleet? He's requested a meeting with you. Personal, not military. He wants to understand how someone becomes capable of ordering the death of children. And then he wants to make sure his generation learns to recognize the warning signs. Hope isn't just about believing in better futures, Emperor. It's about taking responsibility for creating them. As Dr. Chen left the chamber, Vexthul remained at the viewport, watching ships move peacefully through space where battle fleets had once fought. His communicator chimed with an incoming message from Zephyr Prime, new orders from his replacement, demanding an immediate resumption of aggressive operations. For the first time in 40 years of military service, Emperor Vexthul deleted the message without reading it. Instead, he composed a different kind of communication, a request for asylum, addressed to the Galactic Cooperation Council. Attached to it was a complete database of Zephyrian military capabilities, territorial holdings, and strategic plans. His final act as Emperor of the Zephyrian Empire was to ensure its peaceful dissolution. In the margin of the asylum request, he added a single word that Dr. Sarah Chen had taught him in a sterile conference chamber 2 years ago, a word that had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, transforming enemies into allies and soldiers into healers. Hope. The war was over. The real work was just beginning.